Arguably, the most right-wing government in Israel's history may soon be replaced by a government even further to the right. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is the clear favourite to keep his job after next week's election, but his next governing coalition may depend on hardliners in the Jewish settler movement who want to annex large chunks of the West Bank and end all talk of a two-state peace deal. My guest today is Diane, a settler leader who is backing Mr. Netanyahu. Is the rise of the far right about to leave Israel dangerously isolated? Diane, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you very much.
The centre of gravity of Israeli politics is shifting ever further to the right. Is that the way you see it?
No, I'm not sure. I think that the outcome of these elections will not be very different from the previous one. By the way, I'm not sure the elections are already decided. I'm not sure even Mr. Netanyahu's victory is a fait accompli. Israeli public opinion is very volatile. There are very mighty forces that are doing everything they can in order to topple Mr. Netanyahu. That includes even, I think, the President of the United States. Leakings from the White House hinted to that. And also the President of Israel, unfortunately. That one of the powers, I would say almost the only power that the President of Israel has, is to grant a Knesset member the power to form a coalition. I'm not sure that he will grant it to Mr. Netanyahu for sure.
Well, you raised some mighty issues there, not least Israel's relationship with the United States and, of course, the role of President Peres. We'll get to those, but I do want to stick with what's happening on the right of Israeli politics first, because you could argue that the most striking thing we have seen in this election campaign is the rise frankly, from nowhere, of this new party, Jewish Home, which advocates a set of hawkish, ultra-hawkish policies, particularly with regard to the occupied territories, with regard to the Palestinians, which are outflanking Netanyahu from the right. We look at the polls, we see they now command between 12 and 16 or 17 Knesset seats in a potential new parliament. How do you explain their power?
Well, I think that those positions that you refer to as hawkish or ultra-right are quite realistic. The problem, I think, Stephen, is that you misread the situation in the Middle East. The fact is, Israelis begin to understand that the two-state solution, the two-state formula, never existed. It was a mirage, a fata morgana, that as you get closer to it, you reveal that it was just hot air. And not because of Israel, not because of the settlers, because of the refusal of the Palestinians to accept it. Then Israelis start to think, okay, if this is the situation, how do we cope with this new understanding? I suppose that ultimately Europeans and Americans will grasp the same reality and will start to think again about the axioms of the peace process.
All right, well, let's unpick that a little bit. Let you tell me I don't quite understand what's happening in Israel today. What I think I understand is that Naftali Bennett, the leader of Jewish Home, is quite explicit. He wants to annex, as soon as possible, annex 60% of the land of the West Bank, which internationally is regarded as occupied land, illegally occupied land, which should be handed over as part of a peace process. He wants 60% annexed, and he wants to do away once and for all with the talk of a two-state solution. Are you with him on that?
Look, I would like it to happen. I don't think it's going to happen in the foreseeable future, the annexation, I mean. I think it's a natural outcome.
Well, if you want it to happen, and if a majority of Israelis decide they want it to happen, why shouldn't it happen in terms of the Israeli government and its policy?
Because I don't think that in the coming elections the majority of Israelis will decide that. But
well, hang on, this is complicated because I want to get to the part of this particular issue. If you want it to happen, why are you not supporting Naftali Bennett and his Jewish Home Party, which advocates it, and why are you supporting Benjamin Netanyahu, who's shied away from that policy?
I will tell you. An election is not, a beauty pageant. An election, you go to the ballot first and foremost to elect the prime minister. And when I take a look at the candidates for prime minister, their stature, their international stature, their ability to make decisions, their experience, well, that proverbial phone call at 3 a.m. in the morning from the head of the Mossad that tells the Prime Minister, Mr. Prime Minister, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is going to make a big mistake. What do we do? I want Benjamin Netanyahu to get that.
I see. So you only want Netanyahu because you think he's more acceptable to the West. You think he has perhaps more statesman-like qualities. But when it comes to the actual issue of how to deal with the Palestinians, you actually support the far right and Jewish Home and everything that they've said. I just wonder if you actually support things like the quote from Mr. Bennett not so long ago when faced with an Arab member of Knesset. He said to that gentleman, he said, when you were still climbing trees, we had a Jewish state here. Is that actually the kind of politics that in your heart you share?
No, not at all. I believe that even Mr. Bennett regrets that outburst. By the way,
because to many people watching this program, that sounds overtly racist.
Yeah, but I think he was quoting one of your prime ministers. I think he was quoting Benjamin Disraeli. But never mind. I think that was a mistake. He knows that it is a mistake. Look, he's inexperienced. He has the right to make mistakes. But look, it's more important the second part of your question. Does the annexation talks, or what you call the far-right government that is going to be maybe elected, forbid the possibility to establish a Palestinian state? Well, look, the fact is that a Palestinian state could exist. It was a Palestinian decision not to establish it, not an Israeli one. It's not because of the settlements, it's not because of Netanyahu, it's not because of Danny Dayan, it's not because of Naftali Bennett. It's because of the fact that time and time again the Palestinians rejected every offer of a Palestinian state. Now, you can doubt Netanyahu's sincerity.
I suppose the point is, Mr. Dayan, that we have Palestinians who come into the Hard Talk studio, and I ask them about the historic decisions they've taken when it comes to all of the long Oslo process and the discussion of a two-state solution. They can speak for themselves. You have to speak for whom you represent.
Exactly.
That is the Jewish settlers. You tell me that you don't think Mr. Bennett, who is perhaps one of the stars of the current election campaign, is the right man to take Israel forward. But why is it that the party you are campaigning for and supporting, that is Netanyahu's Likud party, includes very senior in its list of potential members of Knesset, people like Moshe Feiglin, who, to quote him from just a recent comment to the New Yorker magazine, said, "You can't teach a monkey to speak and you can't teach an Arab to be democratic. The Arab," he said, "destroys everything he touches." That is a man that you are campaigning for.
Well, no, I am not campaigning for Moshe Feiglin. I am campaigning for Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, with respect, yes, you are campaigning for the Likud bloc, and that includes
Stephen,
Mr. Feiglin, who is going to get a seat in the next Knesset.
That's right.
Do you think it's acceptable that he should be part of the Likud ticket?
Look, that's a question you have to ask the people that voted for him.
To be honest, it's a question I have to put to you because you've decided to campaign.
I think it is a very unfortunate quote, and if he not only...
It's not just a quote, it's a mindset.
You are right.
And I put it to you that your face is on Israeli television telling Israelis to vote Likud. And if they vote Likud, this is the kind of gentleman they are going to have inside the Knesset.
Not at all. This is the exception that proves the rule. I mean, Feiglin represents himself, and he's in that quote especially, he's the exception that represents that proves the rule. No, I'm not voting for that kind of quotes. I am voting for a responsible prime minister that will lead Israel he will safeguard Israel's interests, not for that kind of quote.
No, with respect, if I may say so, even this short interview thus far contradicts what you just told me, because you said to me that you actually support Jewish Home's notion that the peace process is dead and that annexation of the West Bank should proceed. You say, well, it shouldn't happen straight away, but it should happen. If that is the case, it makes no sense at all that you offer yourself as a supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu, who, as you know, in 2009 declared that he accepted the idea of a two-state solution and would work for a two-state solution. You can't have it both ways.
Well, look, politics is the art of the possible. You, in an election especially, you have to choose the party you identify with most.
How can you identify with Netanyahu if we take seriously his commitment to a two-state solution? Or maybe we shouldn't take that seriously.
I will tell you. I don't know. I will tell you very candidly that I really don't know if Mr. Netanyahu means it or is tactical. I really don't know. But I will tell you something more important.
You think it could just be tactical?
Stephen, I want to tell you something more important than that. I think you British say that the proof of the pudding is in its eating. Well, in its eating, despite the moratorium on construction in Judea and Samaria, that was very unfortunate. I see a policy of building, of construction that I like. And despite the Barahian speech in which he adopted the two-state solution, I see a political attitude towards the Palestinians that I admire.
Okay, so what you seem to be saying to me, and I don't want to paraphrase if this is unfair, but you seem to be suggesting to me that to understand Netanyahu, we should understand that rhetorically he remains committed to his two-state solution, but in every practical, meaningful sense, he is walking away from that policy as fast as he can, particularly by encouraging the massive expansion of Jewish settlement construction across the West Bank. Is that what you're saying?
No, I wouldn't phrase it exactly that way, but I will tell you what I mean. I think that Mr. Netanyahu is beginning to understand what I may humbly say, understood quite a long time ago. That after Mr. Olmert's offer to the Palestinians that they rejected, that was an offer that included withdrawal from virtually all of Judea and Samaria, territorial swaps one-to-one, division of Jerusalem, internationalization of the Holy Basin in Jerusalem, everything. You can read Condoleezza Rice's memoirs. She said she couldn't believe her eyes how far-reaching was Mr. Olmert's offer. And Mahmoud Abbas rejected it. Then there is no going to be a two-state solution. There is not because of us, because of the Palestinians, because of their rejection.
Again, I don't want to go into this history for too long. There's other important things to discuss. We know the Palestinians never believed for 1 second that Olmert could deliver that deal, so that is by the by. But
no,
let us just stick to this analysis of what is happening to Israel's attitude to the Palestinians today. I am fascinated that you raise the issue of Ehud Olmert. You know as well as I do, I've spoken to him about this myself in Tel Aviv, you know that Olmert now believes that unless a two-state deal can be done, the sort of deal that he outlined that you've talked about, he says this: Israel will, quote, face a South African-style struggle for equal voting rights from the Palestinians. And as soon as that happens, he says, the state of Israel could be finished.
Well, that proves exactly how committed Ehud Olmert was. He said that as Prime Minister. Maybe he repeated it now,
yes,
but he said that as Prime Minister.
You know what he's saying. He's saying that the future, if you have your way, is of an apartheid-style Israel in which the Palestinians are permanently locked into enclaves, occupied territory, rendering them stateless, second-class citizens.
Well, that's not the only senseless thing that Prime Minister Olmert said. But his commitment to a two-state solution, that kind of commitment proves exactly if Ehud Olmert wasn't able to achieve that goal, no one will be. But I will tell you something about South Africa. I am an avid traveler. I have been everywhere, virtually everywhere over the globe. I refused to visit South Africa until 1994.
On principle?
Of course.
Because you felt it to be racist?
Of
because
course.
You saw people there dispossessed of their rights?
I landed in Johannesburg for the first time in my life in 1994 when President Nelson Mandela was already in office. There is no comparison at all between the two. Look, let's talk about the moral.
It's strange that many civil rights campaigners in South Africa do see a very clear parallel between their struggle for freedom and the Palestinians and their particular form of dispossession today.
Look, Stephen, Israel made a lot of mistakes regarding South Africa. I am not proud of the fact that back in the 90s Israel helped South Africa. No, I'm not proud of it. I think it was a mistake. But this is not the point. The point is completely different. Look, let's see the moral justification, the moral balance, the balance of morality in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. When we talk about South Africa, we are talking about something that is utterly immoral. Now I would like for a minute, let me explain the balance of morality in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There are two ethnic groups, Jews and Palestinians, that both sincerely believe that the land is theirs. I sincerely believe that the land is mine. We came after 2,000 years after we were expelled. We yearned for it. We prayed for it 3 times a day for 2,000 years.
Yes, but you don't believe that land is God-given to the Jews, do you?
No, I am a secular person.
Exactly.
I am talking about history. I am talking about historical facts.
Yeah, and with respect, we could spend the next half hour talking history.
No, but this is very important.
We need to get to the nub of this issue. The Palestinians living in the West Bank today are dispossessed of basic rights. They do not get a right to vote for the power that has ultimate sovereignty over them, and that is the fact. You cannot get away from it.
No, I will finish the argument. Look, they believe they saw us as a colonialist force. Okay, but the fact is that partition that was offered time and again, was accepted by us, rejected by them. They launched an attack in order to exterminate us. Going to square one is the immoral outcome of the conflict.
I do not want this interview simply to rehearse history. I want to look forward. You have told me, and many people on the right in Israel today tell me, that they ultimately believe the West Bank will be annexed. It will never be handed over to a Palestinian state. It will always be controlled by Israel. Simple question then.
Yeah,
will those Palestinians, 2.5 million, hang on, will those 2.5 million Palestinians who you believe will be permanently under Israeli control in the West Bank be allowed to vote in Israeli elections?
I will give you a very simple answer. First of all, we are talking now about an interim modus vivendi. There is no final status solution at hand now. We are talking about an interim situation. Look.
So they live in limbo?
No. They live in a reality they created. But look, Stephen.
You created it. You invaded Israel. Israel conquered that territory in 1967. And if you want, I can cite all of the international law which says that is a military occupation.
Well, no, that's
who are you
not
apologizing
right.
to?
The
international community?
There wasn't an Israeli expansionist grand design in order to grab the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. It was a defensive war. Its incidental outcome is that we returned to Judea and Samaria. It was not an aggression, not at all. But this is not the main point. The main point is that we are talking about an interim situation in which we have to find a modus vivendi that is good for everyone, as good as possible to everyone. Now look, we can, as you suggest, I believe, keep trying to form two states. President Clinton did it, and he brought catastrophe over the Middle East. He took office in 1993 with a stable Middle East. He left office in 2001 with a completely chaotic Middle East. Now, look, what we have to do is to stop trying to attain, right now, the unattainable, as heroic, as tempting it may be, and try to improve the situation on the ground for everyone, for Israelis and for Palestinians. And I will tell you something that may surprise you. I think Israel should now take an active offensive of improving human rights for the Palestinians. I think the fact that
is not one of the most basic human rights to be able to vote and determine the political power that actually controls your life. Palestinians do not have that right.
I will tell you. First of all, the basic human right is the right to live. And I hope my daughter will be able to stop going to school every morning in a bulletproof bus because of terrorist attacks. If that happens, we can make tremendous improvement.
And I'm sure that would be echoed by the Palestinian leadership too, who say they are absolutely committed to rooting out terrorism.
Good. I think Israel can now take calculated risks. I am happy on every checkpoint that is removed. Rejoices me. I will even tell you more than that.
But this isn't just about checkpoints, it's about basic rights.
And if you're talking about political rights, you asked about political rights.
But I need to ask you a question, if I may.
I agree that political rights are very important. I'm a political creature. I will be the last person to underestimate the importance of political rights. But the fact, first of all, Palestinians do have political rights. They elected a president, Mahmoud Abbas. They elected a parliament. By the way, they elected Hamas as the leading force. That's right, that later they made the coup d'etat in Gaza that overthrew everything. You are right that they do not have full political rights. But I want to tell you something, Stephen. I am a person whose vision of the world is nationally centered. I respect the national feelings, the national aspirations of the Palestinians. I respect them very much. By the way, I think that I understand them much better than a liberal in Tel Aviv or in London. But because I understand them so well, I fear them so much. Because I know the final aspiration, the national aspiration of the Palestinians is to return to all of Palestine, to Jaffa and to Beersheba and to Haifa. And that's the reason an agreement is impossible.
You say you understand the Palestinians. I just wonder whether you understand what you, and indeed many other important figures on the Israeli right, are getting Israel into. It looks very likely, if Mr. Netanyahu returns to power with a government which is a coalition of even more right-wing individuals than the last government we saw, it looks as though the relationship with the United States and the international community will be one of Israeli isolation. You ready to live with that?
Well, I am not sure. You know, we have seen these kind of dramatic prophecies in the past, and they didn't crystallize.
Well, I'm sure you saw the long report by the commentator Jeffrey Goldberg, who's very well connected in the United States, who described in private how President Obama is saying Netanyahu is, quote, leading Israel down a path towards almost total isolation.
Well, look, I do not underestimate our relationship with the United States, not at all, and not with President Obama. But
and yet you support the building of more and more settlements, including the E1 settlement, which the Americans have called completely provocative, counterproductive, deeply disappointing.
I got to understand that you don't like history or reminiscence from history. But look, I am old enough to remember, for instance, 1981, when Prime Minister Menachem Begin destroyed the Iraqi nuclear reactor. And Shimon Peres, and I am sure also very important figures in the international arena, threatened Israel that will bring upon its isolation. And today the whole world, I think, thanks Israel for doing that. So, if you think that Islamic fundamentalist enclave in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, the kind of the Mali you are now facing in Central Africa, will stabilize the Middle East, will prevent the falling of King Abdullah in Jordan, will bring peace in the Middle East, then you are so naive, so naive.
A final thought. You are personally backing Mr. Netanyahu very strongly. Did it give you pause when the recently retired chief of the Shin Bet, one of the most senior security officials in Israel, said that Netanyahu has a record of consistently putting his own interests before the national interest? Right now, he said, Israel faces a crisis of leadership and of values.
Well, I differ with him. I think that he was used by mighty political forces in order to influence the election.
I don't think the head of the Shin Bet is easily used by any force.
Well, the head of the Shin Bet has, I believe, his preferences who could be prime minister, who should be prime minister, and he uses, unfortunately, he uses his prestige in order to influence the election. By the way, I'm not sure I would do something different. I mean, if I was convinced that I want Sheli Yachimowicz to be prime minister, I think maybe I will use my prestige in order to do that.
Well, Danny Diane, we can't give you that opportunity today because we've ended, but thanks very much for being on HARDtalk. Thank you very much indeed.